When you partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast Markets with Shawn Hackett. Shawn Hackett is with Hackett Financial out of Boca Raton, Florida. He's nice enough to come on and talk about what's happening in the marketplace. So Shawn, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good, Casey. Another day, another dollar.
That's right. Something like that. You must be living good if you get $1 every day. So
Well, depends what currency it's in.
There you go. There you go. All right, man. There's a lot of moving parts as usual here. Take a look at what's going on in the world. We've got this situation in the energy market. We look at oil. Russia is just as fast as they can sell stuff. They're selling stuff, and Saudi Arabia and OPEC countries are kind of sitting back, trying to hold back production to kind of get that price raised up. If you look where oil has been fluctuating for the last, it seems like almost 3 months now, it's kind of been bouncing between that 69 and 74, 75. Maybe every once in a while it jumps up to 76 or 77, but primarily it's kind of hovering in the low to mid 70s range, and it doesn't matter what anybody says; it just stays the same. And a lot of geopolitical stuff there. When you start looking at how's China coming online and all those kind of things, starting to play in that, but oil just can't seem to break out of that mid 70s range.
Well, Russia's been dumping oil at $65 a barrel to India and China and whoever else will buy it. And they keep doing it. So, as long as they have the supply and the will to do that, there's just no way the oil market can muster up a rally beyond a short-term trade, and it just comes back down because $65 is holding it back. It's like having a leash around a dog. You can only get so far away from the owner before the leash kicks in. And that's the problem. And the wheat market is exactly the same thing. Russia has been dumping wheat well below the market for months upon months. We try to rally here from time to time, and then the leash gets pulled, and we come back down, and that Russia is holding that back. And then, doesn't mean demand isn't there for it. It just means that demand's being satiated by really cheap wheat and really cheap crude, right. Which means anyone that wants to sell it for a higher price, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
So,
yep, and you're exactly right. For all the sanctions that are put against that and everything else you see, it hasn't stopped anybody from really buying that. And
it just stops who they sell it to, but right. It doesn't stop selling it. They're still selling it to those that don't care about the sanctions. Mm-hmm. And as long as this war is going on and they need a bunch of money, they're going to have to sell.
Yeah.
That's the way. They just have to keep funding what they're doing, and the only way they can fund what they're doing is they got to sell wheat and crude oil, essentially. Yeah.
So one thing that just came to my mind here, and we've talked about it quite a bit, with all the stuff that's happening here, you've got India that is kind of holding on, kind of that last bastion of hope when you start looking at overall supplies, but they've been struggling here of late. Looking at the weather pattern, Shawn, that you follow, what's your thoughts about Indian weather patterns moving forward? And are you still looking to see a big effect this year on their crop?
Yeah, the monsoon season, for those who don't know, really starts June 1st, and it kind of ends at the end of September. Some might argue it's a little longer than that, but that's the core monsoon season. So we're in the first month. First month is not the most critical. There's never a bad June that can't be recovered if you have a good July. Okay. But like the US, June is a setup month for the month of July, which is July is the number one monsoon rainfall month of the year for India. They must have the monsoon deliver in July. They cannot make it up in any other month, given how much more rainfall falls in July versus the other months. So far, what we have is we have a monsoon that's about 2.5 weeks delayed in starting. We have rainfall that's way down below normal, and we've had extremely hot temperatures. So we are definitely starting and showing the early signs of a poor monsoon season. And that's been our forecast. And we do believe that this is going to carry over into the key month of July. And if we get into the mid-late July and July is going to turn up significantly short, then the markets that are produced out of India, that they are important, whether it's rice, whether it's sugar, whether it's cotton, they're going to react. And I think that this is going to be not just June, July, but I think they're just going to have a very poor monsoon season overall. And it's going to be a big story that one of the largest exporters of ag supplies in the world is actually going to halt or actually potentially import, depending how bad their crops turn out to be. Just as an example, sugar, this last year they were down like 5% from what was expected. Not a major problem, just a small, a little bit below normal. And they cut off exports at half of what they were supposed to be because they're worried about their supply. In a normal weather crop year where El Nino is developing, and you can have sugar production down 20% or more. So a 5% reduction in production caused them to cut exports in half. What's going to happen if the market worries about a 20% reduction? It's lights out for the sugar market, just totally lights out. So that's the potential, not only in sugar, but you could say the same thing about wheat and rice and cotton and all these other, milk. They've become a net importer of milk for the first time in history because of problems with feed prices being too high, disease for the animals because of the aberrant weather and such forth and so on. So definitely something that we would alert all your listeners to pay attention to. We think it's going to be a pretty big story throughout the growing season this year and lead to a significant rupturing of the ag supply chain, at least for the crops that they are important with growing there.
Yep.
So,
all right. Finally, just put out a report this morning, and I kind of had a brief chance to kind of read through it before we came on. But basically, we're sitting in we've got 2/3 of the cake bake, I guess, as you start looking at these weather cycles. What we've got, so we've got windy, dry weather, kind of across the central grain belt. Out in my area, we've got some cooler, wet weather that you see moving through. But in the central grain belt area, you see some drier conditions there. But we haven't had the heat yet. I think that's the one thing that we haven't had. We haven't had those high.
Well, what's scary, Casey, is without having like persistent high heat. We've had a few days, a little heat here and there, but without having persistent heat, we still have subsoil moisture at 2012 levels and akin to prior drought levels, meaning that our subsoil moistures have been depleted to an historic degree up to this point without even having the heat. If you look at vegetative health, which is a way of taking satellite pictures and determining how the vegetation looks, and you can equate that to what it was last year versus now, what it was in 2012 versus now. And the vegetative health is very, very, very poor without having the heat because it's just been so perpetually dry. Remember, the problem is the dryness started very, very early. A lot of droughts don't really get going until mid-late June. This one started, in early mid-May. So this was an early start. And I think that's why we're seeing effects that are greater than you would expect to see given the lack of heat. That's why if we were to bring in the heat, Casey, as we get into pollination and we maintain a drier pattern. A drier pattern doesn't mean no rainfall. It just means that you're going to continue to have below normal rainfall, right?
Right.
But if you have 3/4 of an inch in Iowa and it's cool, that actually can go a long way with the genetics we have and with the soils they have in improving the prospects for the crop. If it's hot and you get 3/4 of an inch, it does absolutely nothing, especially with subsoil moisture as poor as it is. So that's really where we're at. Can the heat come in and really deliver a lethal blow to crop prospects as we move into pollination? The rains that were widely advertised over the last week, greatly disappointed. And so we've had a reaction to the upside here early this week. There's another well-advertised set of rains coming over the next 7 to 10 days. The models have been projecting rain all season long, and they continue to overpromise, and the rains under-deliver. Now, just because that's the trend doesn't mean that these rains won't deliver. It's just been that the trend is they just have not been able to pick these rains correctly. So if this rain event over the next 10 days does not deliver, Casey, and we have another disappointing rain event, and then we go into pollination and we bring some heat in, then the markets are going to have to react much more violently to the upside. So I really think this next 10-day potential window to get some meaningful rains is critically important to buying some time for the crop, to kick the can down the road a little bit, to see if we can, catch a change in the weather pattern. So we'll see what happens. But I think for right now, markets are going to pause. We might see a little bit of a correction. The markets are very untrusting of the models right now because they've been so wrong, consistently wrong. At the same time, you keep throwing rain in a forecast. Someone's going to sell just in case we're right this time. But anyway, that's where we're at. But I don't really see any overall change to a drier weather pattern. But if you really, really want to get Iowa and Illinois, those black soils, if you really want to get those crops down, I really think you got to bring in the heat it doesn't matter if you bring in the heat now, just got to bring in the heat in July. And we have a couple of variables that we're watching that typically have been very good at determining that. One is global angular momentum. Typically, that needs to be neutral to negative to be a very, very hot signature. Right now, it's positive, and it has been positive, and that's why we've been having the cool weather. The Euro model has it weakening considerably into the end of the month to where it's kind of a weak positive. The GFS has it staying strong positive. Obviously, if the Euro model is correct and that trend continues downward, you could foresee a potential for global angular momentum to move into negative territory in July, given what the Euro trend looks like in terms of the downtrend. And obviously, there's no credible way I know of to predict global angular momentum other than to follow the trends in the models and to follow El Nino. So one of the things that tells us that maybe the Euro is onto something versus the GFS, which is typically the worst model. It performs worse than the Euro, although they both are terrible. Is that the central sea surface temperatures of the Central Pacific? The El Nino's been weakening for over a week now. We had this big push to about plus 0.9 degrees C, and now we're about 0.65 plus 0.65 degrees C, which is borderline marginal El Nino. A weakening El Nino signature tends to press the global angular momentum in the downward direction. Maybe that's what the Euro is picking up on. And the GFS is just not seeing it correctly. They're not initializing it correctly. But typically, weakening El Nino trend does tend to put some downward pressure on global angular momentum. Obviously, we'll have to watch this. But if we start to see that the GFS is starting to cave in and it's confirming that the Euro is on the right track and that we're moving towards a much more weaker global angular momentum and possibly something more negative, we start to see some projections of a negative global angular momentum, then that's what brings in the really, really nasty hot to go with the dry. The other thing we're watching, and this is something that happened in 2012, is that North Atlantic has been really getting hot the sea surface temperature of the North Atlantic just been sizzling here the last couple of weeks. A big time heating up of North Atlantic, and we know that if we have a negative Pacific decadal oscillation, which we do, and you have a piping hot North Atlantic, that's a hot signature, meaning that combination is a hot signature. We showed a chart today on our report that went over in 2012, and we saw this dramatic heat, warming up of North Atlantic between mid-June and mid-July with a negative global angular momentum in 2012, and that's what brought in the big heat. So that's a hot signature. So the way we're framing it, Casey, is this: let's just say that the global momentum stays positive. But if this North Atlantic stays hot, it probably means we're going to get a warmer outcome than you would expect to see with a positive global angular momentum. But if you really want to bring in the heat, if you get those two things combined, that's how you get scorching of the earth for the corn crop in July. Not that I'm wishing that upon anybody, by the way. I'm not here cheering scorch of the earth weather at all. It's going to happen whether I forecast or not. But I'm saying that that's what we are looking for to give us the green light that the heat's going to come in and deliver the knockout punch. Right now, as of today, the global angular momentum is not showing up, but the North Atlantic is showing up. And the models are very, they're not agreeing with each other. So we either the euro is wrong and it's going to meet the GFS, or the GFS. Somewhere in the next 1 to 2 weeks, we're going to get a move in one direction or the other, and that'll be a very, very important development. So,
yeah. All right. So one more question. So you had a friend of mine just walk in here, and I know the answer to this, so I'm going to make sure. I'm just asking for a friend here, but global atmospheric angular momentum we talked about before, and that is a correlation between how fast the atmosphere is spinning to the correlation of the Earth as it spins, right? And
right. So it means if the atmosphere is moving faster than the Earth, then the winds are very, very strong.
Right.
They're really, really strong. That's the positive plan. That tends to keep things, at least in North America. Remember, every region is different of how GLAM impacts it. But for North America, it's a cold or a cooler biased signature. Now, if the atmosphere is moving more slowly than the Earth, then the winds are very, very low, a negative global angular momentum. Generally speaking, El Nino produces a positive GLAM. La Nina produces a negative GLAM. It's not 100% ironclad proof. Nothing is in this life, but that's the general trend. Right. And it's a very, very reliable signature over many, many years under many, many different circumstances, is positive, negative GLAM, and what it means for temperatures during July. It means something completely different during the wintertime, but during July, that's what this specific highly correlated teleconnection means. It doesn't mean you can't have warm weather in July. It doesn't mean you couldn't have some above normal temperatures, but to get the really scorching heat, Casey, very, very hard to imagine we would get that in July without global angular momentum at least being more neutral to neutral negative. If it stays positive with the North Atlantic being hot, I think you could have some warmer temperatures, but not scorching hot, not like 2012. You would miss out on that scorching hot like we had in Argentina, where it just burned the crop up. You'd miss that effect if the global angular momentum stayed positive. So,
all right. So you've talked about in the past in the North Atlantic, you talked about how it's warming up, and then because of the warm up, there was forgive me, I forget what it's called. There's a collection of ice.
The Beaufort Gyre is north west of Greenland. It's this big area of water, and it typically circulates like this, and this traps all the fresh, cold water that melts every summer with the Arctic glacier. And as long as it's spinning this way, it's like a seal. It just keeps it, and then it grows and it gets larger. Right now, we have the largest quantity of fresh, cold Arctic water in history. Well, let's put it this way: since we've been measuring it,
right?
Since we've been measuring it, periodically the currents will reverse. And if it goes counterclockwise, then it just dumps all this cold, fresh water into the North Atlantic and into the Atlantic. And then you get your significant sea surface temperature cooling cycle, which we're anticipating occurring by 2025 to be the beginning of that process.
Right.
1965 is the last time that we really saw the Beaufort Gyre reverse and dump all this cold, fresh water. And, they call it the Great Salinity Event because it reduces the salinity of the central northern Atlantic. And you can actually measure that. Mm-hmm. And it just dramatically changes weather patterns, moisture patterns, temperature patterns, growing cycle length. And it's a 40-year cycle. So we go through a 40-year period where it's trapped, and a 40-year cycle where it's letting all this cold water come out. And so we've been in the 40-year warming cycle of sea surface temperatures for the Atlantic now. That is expected to peak in 2025. If you read some recent research that Woods Hole puts out, and they do some of the best work on the Beaufort Gyre. I think they just put something out last month. They believe that a reversal of the reversal of the rotation of the Beaufort Gyre is imminent, in their words, not mine. Imminent. That they actually are starting to see the early signs that the reversal process is about to begin. Okay. And this is a much larger cold pool than it was in 1965. And 1965 was a dramatic change in weather patterns and how cold things got and how short the growing cycle. So it's something we've been talking about for over a decade as a big climatic weather event to be on look at, because it's going to dramatically alter weather completely different from what we've seen in most of our lifetimes, at least since the mid 1980s. We're not quite there yet, but it's something we're, paying attention to, as is the Woods Hole Institute, of course. And the minute we see that that's actually reversing and happening, or getting that cooling of the Atlantic Ocean, which would mean a negative AMO, because remember, we've been in a positive Atlantic multidecadal oscillation for the better part of the last 40 years. It would actually go to a negative AMO, and that, wow, you want to take weather volatility up another notch on top of what we already have, that'll do it. That'll do it.
Is there any correlation between the, what's that again? Beaufort, what was it?
Beaufort, Beaufort, Beaufort Gyre, Gyre. I believe that's how it's said. Beaufort Gyre, Beaufort Gyre.
Whatever.
I think it's something like that.
Tomato, right? But is there any correlation between that and the warming of the North Atlantic, like you talked about? Does that increase or decrease the cycle?
That would dramatically cool the North Atlantic. It would just shut it down. It would be the North Atlantic would get super, super crazy cold. That's how you get your negative AMO. That's how you get your dramatic cooling of temperatures. That's how you get your longer winters. That's how you get your shorter growing cycles, because the North Atlantic, because remember, it's dumping into the North Atlantic. Right. So that's the first place that you're going to see the big cool down occur when it does reverse.
Right. What I'm asking is, like you talked about, the North Atlantic seeing some signatures of warmth coming in, does that affect that cycle at all, the Beaufort Gyre cycle at all? Is that I'm
not aware. I mean, we've generally had a warm North Atlantic for to different degrees. So let me just give you an example. So the AMO, which is essentially a measure of the difference between the North Atlantic and the Central Atlantic, the AMO reached plus 1.02 last month. That is a record high AMO of all time, never seen before, ever, since we've been recording this term. That means that the Atlantic is just bubbling in the North Atlantic right now. Our experience, whether it's a stock, whether it's a commodity, whether it's climate, whether it's economics, as you approach major turning points, bull market end, bear market end, you tend to get spike trades into a top or exhaustion crashes into a bottom. What tends to happen at the end of a warming trend is you get this final last gasp up in sea surface temperatures before the trend turns violently down. I don't know why the world operates this way, why the Earth why the forces seem to always have this final move before a turn, but it shows up repeatedly in cycle after cycle, chart after chart, that you get these exhaustion tops and exhaustion bottoms at important turning points. This final surge to a record AMO feels to me like the last gasp before we turn around, just as the Woods Hole Institute is indicating that they were seeing the early signs of a major turn. That would be kind of how it works. Remember, the 1930s Dust Bowl was the end of the last sea surface temperature warming cycle of the Atlantic before it turned violently back down. That's why we have the Gleisberg cycle risk is so high in 23, 24, 25, because this is your peak heat SSTs, right? Sea surface temperatures. This is your peak aggressive hot potential. This is your peak potential for drought. Like this is where if you're going to get an extreme event like Gleisberg, it would occur at the end of a 40-year sea surface temperature warming cycle, like it did in the 30s and like it's done 11 centuries since we've studied it. So it's all, everything's connected in this great cycle that we follow. But I don't think in and of itself it impacts it, but I do think that this final surge in the AMO and this bubbling and boiling of the North Atlantic is probably a sign of the beginning of the end of the warming trend of the Atlantic Ocean that then turns on a dime out of nowhere. It just all of a sudden goes straight down, and everyone doesn't know what happened until the weather just acts completely differently from what we've been accustomed to for the last 30 or 40 years.
Right. Okay. All right, Shawn, good stuff as usual. Folks want to reach out to you and get more information about what you're doing at Hackett Financial. What's the best way to do that?
Our Twitter page is at Faradex11. We have our website, Hackett, Hackett, advisors.com. And of course, we have our LinkedIn page. Search my name or the Hackett Financial Advisors. From time to time, we place comments, interviews, and things about some of these cycles to kind of steer people in the right direction with how we look at the world, how we look at agriculture, climate, and how we make our price projections.
Right on, man. Shawn, I appreciate you taking time to be on the podcast.
Sounds good, Casey. Always have a blast.
Thanks, man. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC, or LinkedIn over at Moving Iron Podcast. Go see the YouTube version of this on the YouTube channel, which is the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. Go to Moving Iron LLC for everything Moving Iron related. And if you want to see more information about the Moving Iron Summit, it's all that's there. It's September 11th through the 13th in Nashville. You can send me an email at MovingIronPodcast at MovingIronPodcast.com if you want to get more information about that. Be one of the first 150 people to sign up, and Axon Tire will take advantage of you can take advantage of Axon Tire's $50 discount with that. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour, Shawn Hackett. Just doing some iron, folks. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard work.